The movie Cold, Wet, and Alive depicts a hypothermic accident. It has two parallel themes: how David and a group of early spring paddlers became hypothermic, and the accident process. The purpose of this video is to provide a primer for instructors on using barrier analysis to prevent outdoor recreation accidents. Students watch the movie, the action is stopped, and a discussion occurs. However, this video can also be used as a standalone educational tool. Conceptually, barrier analysis is fairly straightforward. Accident prevention is the process of placing barriers to prevent or reduce an unwanted energy transfer from the source to the target. In the movie, the cold water and other environmental and human factors result in David becoming hypothermic. Unfortunately, David and the group didn't place sufficient barriers to prevent him from becoming hypothermic and losing his boat. Losing his boat resulted in an accident. The underlying factors are useful in identifying barriers and the sources of potential unwanted energy transfers. The underlying factors are often divided into human, environmental, and equipment factors. Some use unsafe acts or human factors and unsafe conditions or environmental factors. Either way, the list provides a convenient checklist of factors to examine. Barriers are generally the safety measures that individuals or the group take to reduce the likelihood of an unwanted energy transfer, in this case, hypothermia. In the model, the Swiss cheese slices represent barriers, and the holes in the Swiss cheese indicate that the barriers are less than adequate. A human factor that reduces physiological stress, the group snacks and replenishes their energy supply. The sun provides warmth. The narrator notes that on the warm rocks, their heat loss is minimal, so they don't need to work at all at staying warm. An equipment factor is having adequate clothing. Both Becky and Dean decide to wear wetsuits.
Or are you going to be ripe in that thing? It's so warm today.
Underlying factors can also be the source of potential unwanted energy transfers. The transfer can be aided by ineffective or less than adequate barriers, represented by the holes in the Swiss cheese that metaphorically allow the energy transfer to the target to occur. There were numerous human factors that resulted in David becoming hypothermic, a physiological stress. His skill and imperfect Eskimo role didn't keep him out of the cold water. He chose to dress for the moment. He chose not to snack. An environmental factor, David notes at the put-in that the water is really moving.
So much for the weather forecast.
And later in the video, that the water in the canyon is rising. These are terrain and a change in terrain conditions. Both conditions can increase the difficulty of the river and lead to capsizing, again resulting in thermal transfer and a loss of body heat in the cold water. An example of an equipment factor, the narrator notes that cotton clothing offers little protection when wet. Wet cotton is an example of both an inadequate and inappropriate clothing barrier.
Your hands are so cold.
Freezing, what do you expect?
The movie expresses a day's activity. It is easy to stop the movie and discuss what is going on during the day. Consider the impact of time of day, mood of the group, hypothermia, and additional discussion topics. Although the time of day is not indicated at this point in the movie, the time is most likely around 10:30 a.m. The group is enthusiastic and motivated. Hypothermia is not an issue at this point. The radio announcer reports that although the normal high for today is 49 degrees, the actual high for today is expected to be 70 degrees. Also, the announcer suggests that a front may be moving through the area with Sunday back to normal, cold and rainy.
I didn't know I was going to get my feet wet.
The second stop is at the put-in before they begin their trip. Traveling to the site and running shuttle can easily result in an 11 o'clock put-in time. The group is motivated and playful. The body gains or loses heat three ways. Muscles contract and produce heat, which is used to warm the body. The body at rest produces little waste heat from muscle contraction. The sun and fire are examples of external sources of heat. Clothing provides insulation, which retains heat. Add or remove any of the three sources to be comfortable. David relies on exercise and the sun to maintain a comfortable body temperature. The group made their preparations for the day. The equipment, clothes, and other preparations made are all less than adequate barriers. What, if anything, would you do differently?
Hey David, how about that fancy new roll of yours?
Yeah, show it to it.
David's ability to Eskimo roll is a skill and a less than adequate barrier to the cold water. The group is playful. The cold water provides a temporary shock of not having the insulating value of a wetsuit. The purpose of this stop is mainly to emphasize the group playing and having fun.
Let's go get him, come on.
All right, smart guy.
A quick stop prior to the lunch stop. The purpose of this stop is to show that the group is becoming fatigued and less playful. David produces heat by exercising. He loses it quickly because of poor insulation. The sun is still providing him with a significant source of external heat. Project yourself as the group leader. The group is showing signs of becoming tired and fatigued. What might you do at this point to get the group to make the right decision to take out at the upcoming lunch?
It was past 4 when we got to the halfway point.
I'm hungry.
You know, I think this is the last we're gonna see of the road. Canyon starts just up around the bend.
It was after 4 o'clock when they arrived at the lunch stop, the halfway point. What is wrong with this picture? The group is cold, wet, and fatigued. David needs to refuel and add more insulation to retain the heat he is generating by paddling. The group discusses whether they should continue the trip or take out here. Consider the Abilene paradox. It is where individually each group member knows the correct decision, but collectively they make the wrong decision. Individually, they know that they should take out here, but they decide to finish the trip because it is what they think everyone else wants. It is a form of groupthink.
You know, we still have a ways to go. We could call it a day. Probably hitch back to the car from here.
Project yourself as the leader of this trip. If you didn't discuss it before, consider how you would get the group to make the right decision here, including leaving a shuttle vehicle and changing the goal orientation of potential failure if they don't complete the trip. The group behavior is changing, and everyone is beginning to focus on their needs and not those of the group. Note that the movie is 2/3 over before it mentions hypothermia and that David is no longer able to maintain his core temperature. This was by design. David's less than adequate barriers of the sun, exercise, and a cotton shirt were not enough to protect him from the unwanted thermal energy transfer from the cold water. This condition is known as hypothermia. Consider the underlying factors of trip planning, physiological stress, skill, knowledge, terrain and weather changes, and adequate clothing. Could a change in any of these factors have prevented David from becoming hypothermic? Hypothermic, David needs assistance to rewarm.
We gotta get off this river.
Maybe I could find a way back to the bridge.
Yeah. We ought to get David looked at.
Returning to the 3 ways to maintain body temperature, the fire is a source of external heat. The blanket and dry clothes insulate and help to retain the heat gained. Hypothermic, David can generate little, if any, surplus heat through exercise. They did decide to end the trip here. Was that a good decision? In summary, Cold, Wet, and Alive depicts a day's activities that led to a hypothermic accident. It demonstrates barrier analysis, including the unwanted energy transfer from the source to the target. In this case, the cold water creates an unwanted energy transfer to David. The barriers of trip planning, wetsuits, Eskimo roll, snacking, the sun's rays, and other measures taken are less than adequate and contribute to David becoming hypothermic and losing his boat. The underlying factors were used to identify both sources of potential unwanted energy transfers and barriers. As an instructor, watch the movie with your class, stop it where appropriate, discuss barrier analysis and the accident process which resulted in David getting hypothermia, or simply use the video to project what you would do as a leader of this group given the day's events as they unfolded.